Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cereal for Dinner podcast. I'm your host, Ian, and this is our actual first episode, our very first episode, and I'm very excited that you are listening. Whether you're listening on a podcast format or whether you're watching this on YouTube, I don't care. I'm just happy you're listening to it. So, because this is our very first episode, it's actually not going to be marked as episode 1. It's going to be marked as episode 0, and really it's going to be a test episode. And what today's episode is going to be about is I'm going to tell you what the show's about. So basically, this is the show about what the show's about. But as you've probably already guessed by the tagline, Growing Up Generation X, that this is about Generation X. Well, what particularly about Generation X? You might be asking yourself. Okay, it's about Generation X. Ian, tell us what about Generation X are you going to be talking about? Well, I'm going to be talking about kind of globally a lot of different things. I'm going to be talking about the music, the movies, the television show, the fashion, all the things that kind of defined us and kind of evolved in Generation X from the very beginning of what those things looked like and were to the very end of what, well, even up into today. We'll be talking about politics to some degree, although I'm not afraid to talk about politics, but I do want to say I probably won't talk about politics a whole lot, simply because it just doesn't interest me, and there's a lot more shows out there on politics from Gen Xers, and they do a better job at it than I would ever do. So this won't be a political show. This will be more pop culture and underground show of Generation X. And I do know a lot about both of those issues. I do know a lot about pop culture, and I know a lot about the underground. And so we'll be talking about, the issues that defined us. We'll be talking about that and the technology that defined us. Because basically, Generation X is the generation that went from where in the boomer generation, you had the ideas of those things, and then we saw the development of those things in my lifetime. I was born in the early 70s, and the world has changed a considerable amount since I was born. Kind of grew up, in that late 70s, kind of, I got some pictures of me with some bell bottoms as a kid somewhere, a little 4-year-old with bell bottoms on. But then I really kind of came into my own and, started to develop my own concepts of the world in the 80s as I became a teenager. And then in the 90s, kind of, became of age in the 90s. And so it'll kind of be 70s, 80s, 90s, although we will get into some stuff that goes on today. And those issues of the 70s, 80s, and 90s and today will be things regarding the pop culture and the underground. So music, movies, television shows, as I said, but we'll be looking at each individual genre. So we'll be like talking, like, say, for example, we'll talk about movies. We'll talk about the kind of movies that defined our generation, and we'll get into some of the movies specifically and in general. So we'll talk about genre of movies, but we'll also be talking not only about genre of movies, but we'll talk about like specific movies. So for example, one of the episodes we're going to be talking about is Star Wars. Now, if I say Star Wars and I turned you off, please don't let that turn you off. This is not going to be a geek special Star Wars, everything sci-fi channel. That's not. We'll be talking about other things too. It's just that when I say Star Wars, either people go, yay, I love it, or oh, I hate it. You have to admit it defined the generation, whether you liked it or you didn't like it. You're on one side of the fence. There's really not a lot of middle ground for people who are my age when it comes to a movie like that. So I give you an example. That's all I wanted to do, is give an example of something that we'll be talking about in depth and how it affected the culture and, what I think about it and what the guests, some people who are going to be friends, maybe some people who are a little bit more famous than myself, at least right now, we'll be talking about some of those issues, some of those things, like we'll be discussing some stuff. Television shows, like we'll be talking about like growing up in the 80s, the Thursday night lineup. I remember that was a big part of my life, the Thursday night lineup, starting with the Cosby Show, almost afraid to say that these days, and then Family Ties, and then Cheers, and then Night Court, and just how that, those things, how that affected me and how that affected our world. And as far as the music is concerned, I've been around a long time to see a lot of changes in music. I was there at the rise of the hair metal bands, and I was there at the demise of the hair metal bands and the takeover with the grunge era and the alternative era. As a matter of fact, I know so much about music that as the show develops, there might even be a separate podcast on music alone, but like dinner cereal for dinner, music edition. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see when it comes out. Right now, it'll be kind of part of what we do here overall. The fashion, how the fashion has changed over the years. Different specific types of fashion, like parachute pants, and who had them, and who wore them, and why, and breakdancing and things of that nature. So it's going to be an in-depth show. I mean, there'll be thoughtful insights, but it's also going to be a fun show to listen to, particularly if you grew up in the era of Generation X. Now, if you're not a Generation Xer, let's say you came before you're a boomer, or you came after you're a zennial or a millennial, I would also encourage you to watch the show. I mean, you are listening to the show. You will like it. The reason why is, if you're a boomer, a lot of what we did in Generation X was built on the ideas that the boomers had. And some of them were rebelling against it, I admit. And some of them weren't. But there's always this connection. There's this relationship between the Generation X and the former generation, for good or for bad, whether it influenced us or whether we were rebelling against it. But there were a lot of stuff that the boomer generation had that was an idea that came to fruition during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so, if you're a boomer, we're your children. And I know that you probably are interested in what your children are doing, so you will be interested in Generation X as well. You were already adults and probably established families by the time Generation X came into its own, but it will be of interest to you if you are interested in pop culture and stuff like that. Now, let me speak to the generation on the other end, the Zennials or Millennials. If you're a Zennial, you've got one foot in Generation X and one foot in the Millennial world. Generally, people who are born from 79 to 84 are considered that class of Zennials. And those people who are Zennials, you're going to be interested in this too, because some of it will be interesting because, it's a generation that you partly lived through. And if you're a Millennial, especially if you're a Millennial and you're part of the geek culture, what the geek culture likes to do a lot of times is be retro, or if you have a particular niche. So if you're like really into music, you like to get retro with music as well. So you like to look back on some of the bands that you're into and the influence that previous bands had on the bands that you are interested in today. And there's a lot of stuff, I noticed that there's a lot of stuff that's geared toward millennials but as I watch it, there is a whole lot of Generation X influence in some of those shows and music, and to a degree fashion. So we'll be talking about that too. So don't turn it off if you're a millennial. If you are interested in pop culture, and you're interested in underground stuff as well related to the culture, I just would encourage you to listen to the show, give it a try. Well, that's going to be it for this episode here. Like I said, I wanted to keep it short and just basically tell you what the show is going to be about. It's going to be about growing up Generation X and how it affected the world, and how it affected you personally probably, and certainly how it affected me. Do me a favor, please like, comment, subscribe. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform, please do me the favor to share this on your favorite social media. I would really appreciate it. I'd really like to see a large audience with this as far as this is concerned. And then the other thing, of course, I'd like to see a large audience as far as this is concerned. And the other thing is, if you're watching it on YouTube, please share that as well. It will be on YouTube. No, the other thing I wanted to say, sorry, I keep saying the other thing I wanted to say, but oh well, it's how it goes when it's live. There will be special content on YouTube. Okay. For right now, I will upload these on YouTube so you can watch them as well as listen to them. But the footage from the podcast will just kind of be raw footage. It'll just be the upload of the show, basically. And me in front of a camera talking about the whatever I want to talk about, or with some friends talking about what we want to talk about, or a guest. But there will be certain things that will be exclusive to, for now at least, exclusive to YouTube. There might be some related items that I get into, and some videos that I make that won't be appropriate for listening. It just won't be. It'll be better if you watch it on YouTube. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to, I'm trying to get on Spotify. Don't know exactly how that works yet, but we'll get on that. And if you're listening on one of those, then head on over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. But the most important thing is subscribe and share. Please share this. I really want to thank you, and keep tuning in for more in-depth and greater episodes. We will talk to you again soon. I'm Ian, and this is the Cereal for Dinner podcast.